Imagine a photograph that shouldn't have existed. A snapshot taken many decades ago where Nazi soldiers are smiling, posing with a small, fair-haired boy. This unsettling picture, found years later, stumped researchers. But when this old, faded snapshot was enlarged, shocking details of a long-forgotten part of history were revealed. For Stella Michel Lee, a student studying photographs from Eastern Europe during the Second World War, it was just another day in the archives. Thousands of images had already passed before her eyes, but this photograph made her freeze. The yellowed print depicted a very young boy dressed in a miniature military uniform, exactly like the one worn by the 5 Nazi soldiers around him. The cap was clearly too large for his small head. The soldiers in the picture were smiling. Some even had a friendly hand on the child's shoulder. The boy himself was also smiling, but something in his eyes stood out from the general joyful mood. A barely noticeable piercing gaze spoke of something else. What began as routine work at the Melbourne Holocaust Research Centre turned into a captivating investigation for Stella. It was destined to overturn all her ideas about survival in humanity's darkest times. Stella set aside all other tasks and focused entirely on this mystery. The first important discovery was not long in coming. The soldiers belonged to one of the most fearsome Latvian battalions. This information spurred even deeper searches. Soon, she found the boy's name, Alex Kurzem. Among the military photographs donated by an anonymous Melbourne resident were scenes from occupied Latvia, and in several of them featured that same little boy in Nazi uniform. On the back of one photograph, an illegible handwriting scribbled the name Uldis and the battalion's name. Military archives confirmed the sinister connection. The Kurzem Latvian police battalion did indeed exist. They were Nazi collaborators involved in the mass killings of Jews throughout Belarus. But nowhere was there any information about the origin of this child. Stella sent the snapshot for restoration and digital colorization. A few days later, she received a much clearer image. Together with her colleague John, they began to study every detail, the soldiers' facial features, the surroundings, trying to find something they might have missed before. And then they noticed it. Barely discernible facial details made them frown in confusion. Dark hair, blue eyes, a curved nose, drooping eyelids. These were typical features that, at the time, were attributed to one specific ethnic group, the very one being mercilessly exterminated. John was stunned. A young Jew with Nazis. Even a photograph with the devil would sound more plausible. Stella admitted that identifying by physical features had no scientific validation, but this practice was actively used during the war. The researchers couldn't dismiss this theory. They worked tirelessly, contacting historians around the world. The desire to solve this mystery drove them to meticulously check every tiny detail. And the breakthrough came. Stella's research led her to a little-known memoir titled The Mascot. The book contained the incredible life story of Alex Kurzem, a Jewish boy who had been living quietly in a Melbourne suburb for decades. Amazingly, he did have a connection to Nazi soldiers during the war, and was now leading a completely ordinary life. But it was hard to comprehend. Why would Nazi soldiers take pictures with a Jewish child, especially smiling ones, when in the history of the Great War did Nazis show mercy to the Jewish population? However, the more Stella tried to convince herself of the hopelessness of her quest, the stronger her desire to know the truth became. She continued her investigation and soon found an important address. It led to a modest house in a suburb of Melbourne, Australia. When she arrived, she was greeted by an elderly man with piercing blue eyes, exactly like those in the photographs. It was Alex Kurzem himself. He had been expecting someone like her to come. Sooner or later, the past always catches up. The story he shared over countless cups of tea over the following weeks was truly incredible. Born into a Jewish family in Belarus, he couldn't remember his real name or the name of his village. Everything had been erased from his memory by trauma. However, one memory remained crystal clear. That night, when his mother woke him in the dark, she warned that soldiers would come in the morning and that the whole family would die. But the little boy didn't want to die. While his family slept, the frightened child quietly slipped out into the dense forest surrounding their village. Hiding among the trees, shivering from the biting cold, he witnessed the unimaginable. Nazi troops were rounding up the Jewish residents, including his entire family, and exterminating them. He watched his entire village die. He saw everything, Stella, cross-referencing his account with historical records, found documentation of a mass killing in the Belarusian village of Koidanovo. This was one of the few Belarusian words that Kurzem, as an adult, could still recall. The dates matched his story perfectly. Further investigation revealed even more incredible facts. The young boy had somehow survived in the Belarusian wilderness for many months, enduring one of the harshest winters in history. He scavenged for scraps among corpses. At night, he tied himself to high tree branches to avoid wolf attacks. His small body wasted away. He constantly suffered from hunger and frostbite, but by some miracle, he endured. And then the day came that changed his entire life. A patrol from the Latvian police battalion discovered the half-starved child. By all rules, given the fate of Jewish children in the occupied territories, his discovery should have meant immediate execution. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The soldier who found him took the boy to his camp. They decided he would become their mascot. The Latvian battalion, perhaps seeing propaganda value in this photogenic, fair-haired boy, declared him a Russian orphan and gave him a new identity. They named him Alex Kurzem and even assigned him a new birthday, Latvia's Independence Day. The soldiers dressed him in a custom-made uniform and gave him a small rifle, which appeared in several of the photographs Stella had found. The boy's survival instinct was astonishing. Now he had to do something even more difficult: suppress his true identity. For several years the child traveled with the battalion, witnessing the atrocities committed against the people he secretly considered his own. He clapped and laughed along with the soldiers, but inside he cried rivers of tears. One soldier, who he believed knew his secret, once quietly whispered vital advice to him: "Never reveal who you really are." It was advice the boy followed meticulously. Military archives showed that as the war progressed, the battalion was absorbed into the army of the Third Reich. When Soviet troops began to push back the German occupation in the Baltics, the battalion commanders arranged for the boy's protection. He was placed with a middle-class family, the owner of a Riga factory named Jakub Zenis. The Zenis family grew attached to the charming child and eventually adopted him. After the war, the family moved to Australia, bringing the young Alex Kurzem with them. All he took with him from his past was a battered leather suitcase. It held those very incriminating photographs of him in a Nazi uniform and memories too painful to touch. For many years, he kept his secret. He married, raised children, and worked as a television repairman in Melbourne. To his neighbors and friends, he was just a Latvian immigrant who had survived the war, like so many others. Kurzem's Jewish heritage, the massacre of his family, his incredible survival, all of it remained locked away with those photographs, hidden in the old suitcase. Only decades later did cracks begin to appear in the wall Kurzem had built around his past. The nightmares that had plagued him for years intensified. The weight of the secret became unbearable, and finally, he began to share pieces of his story with his eldest son, Mark. At first, Mark thought his father was confused. The story seemed impossible. How could a Jewish child become a Nazi mascot? How could someone survive alone in the woods for months? It sounded like fiction, but Mark soon discovered evidence supporting his father's words. Those same photographs that Stella was now studying. Mark published his father's story in a book, which is what led Stella to his door. This was only the beginning. Over time, more significant evidence emerged, confirming old Kurzem's story. Stella discovered a previously forgotten Nazi propaganda film in the National Archives. Among the footage was a shot showing a small boy in uniform, referred to as the mascot, playing with Aryan children. The child was unmistakably the same, the boy who became Alex Kurzem. The most significant discovery came from studying the diary of a soldier from the Kurzem police battalion, held in the Stanford University archives. An entry reported that the battalion had acquired a foster son, whose parents were unknown, and gave him the name Alex Kurzem. This diary also revealed something astonishing. The boy had survived alone in the Belarusian wilderness for almost 8 months. An almost impossible feat for such a young child. Stella admitted that when she first began this research, she was skeptical. The story seemed too extraordinary to be true, but every document she found corroborated his account. However, not everyone was convinced. Critics emerged from both academics and internet users. Holocaust deniers rejected Kurzem's memories. Descendants of the Zenis family were furious at being portrayed as Nazi sympathizers. The greatest damage to the story's credibility was Kurzem's reluctance to undergo DNA analysis. He avoided the topic, adding fuel to the fire of doubt. Stella suspected his resistance stemmed more from trauma than deception. She believed a part of him was still that little boy in the forest, desperately trying to hide his identity. Perhaps taking the test meant finally admitting who he really was, something he had been conditioned to fear on pain of death. In the end, Kurzem took the DNA test. He was already in his 80s, and still trying to tell the world about his traumatic journey of survival. The test confirmed what he had claimed all along. Alex Kurzem was an Ashkenazi Jew, and he had living relatives he never knew existed. He confessed to Stella in their last meeting that he still felt like two people in one body, who didn't get along very well. The duality of the Jewish boy who witnessed his family's murder, and the Nazi mascot who survived by denying his identity, created a psychological fracture that never fully healed. Stella completed her book about Kurzem's extraordinary life. She planned to give him the manuscript for approval before publication, but the pandemic and lockdown intervened. Unfortunately, Alex Kurzem died from complications related to the virus less than 1 year later. The man who survived the Holocaust in the most unusual circumstances finally passed away at an old age in his adopted hometown of Melbourne. At Kurzem's small funeral, Stella placed a stone on his casket. It was a Jewish tradition she had learned during her research. His story revealed the depths of human survival and incredible adaptability. The irony was that he had survived the horrors of the Holocaust only to be defeated by a modern pandemic. But at least in his final years, he had reclaimed his true identity and made peace with his extraordinary past. The little mascot from the Nazi photographs, against all odds, lived to tell his story. And thanks to Stella's research, his legacy will live on for a very long time. What an incredible story of survival and human resilience. What do you think of this amazing fate? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to everyone who watched this episode. Your support, like, and subscription are very important to us. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss our new videos.